Now, let's talk about this curious story about what really happened during the Biden presidency and who was pulling the strings, who was really in charge, because was clear it wasn't Joe Biden for much of the time. It's been alleged that the majority of official documents signed by President Joe Biden used the same autopen signature. This is a report by the Heritage Foundation. It states we gathered every document we could find with Biden's signature over the course of his presidency. All used the same autopen signature, except for the announcement that the former president was dropping out of the race last year. Josh, what do you make of this report?
Well, it's funny because that last line there is when I first saw this is where my mind immediately went. I saw a lot of people on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days, who when Joe Biden in theory had that I'm dropping out of the race announcement, you actually look at the signature. It looks a lot like a holograph. I that's not typically where my mind goes there. But Rita, in recent years, when it comes to the Hunter Biden laptop, when it comes to COVID-19, when it comes to the fact that we all knew that Joe Biden was running the country in geriatric senile fashion, a lot of these so-called conspiracy theories really are kind of coming true in real time. There, I guess the question for me is that as we continue to learn more and more about just the exact state of Joe Biden's physical and above all mental health over the course of his horrific and historically all-time atrocious presidency. As we continue to learn more and more, and God willing, Congress will do more investigations. Frankly, I think we've barely scratched the surface of this world historical scandal. But as we learn more and more, the question to me is going to be actually this question of who really was pulling the strings. I will tell you my own personal take on this, Rita. It's not a novel take there. It's probably a common opinion there. I have long been of the opinion that it actually is Barack Obama, who was not necessarily running the world per se, but I think that Barack Obama was absolutely, probably more than any other figure, calling a lot of the shots. There was this one very bizarre image of him going to 10 Downing Street in London, trying to meet with the prime minister there. I mean, why would a former president do that? He was also the first president in over 100 years to not physically vacate Washington, D.C. He stayed in Kalorama, a very Tony upscale part of Washington, D.C. there. I continue to think that, Rita, that Barack Obama actually largely was governing in this Biden administration, which makes sense because then he was the leading campaign trail surrogate for Kamala Harris herself there. We all saw how that played out, by the way.
Josh, we've spoken previously about Donald Trump's strategy with the Ukraine-Russia war and the goal of having Europe contribute in a much more meaningful way to their own defence. And it looks like Trump has again managed to get the outcome he wanted, despite all the hysteria, all the doomsday commentary we've had from politicians and commentators, including, I've got to say, disappointingly, some conservative commentators who should know better. Stop getting hysterical about the rhetoric. Look at the bigger picture, look at the strategy, look at the outcomes. Let's hear now from the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
Europe is ready to assume its responsibilities. Rearm Europe could mobilize close to 800 billion euros of defense expenditures for a safe and resilient Europe.
Josh, did the president get his way again? He's been wanting this, and really it should have been in place all along. Europe shouldn't be depending on America to defend it from Russia or any other aggressive force.
Yeah, it strikes me as another huge diplomatic, geopolitical, foreign affairs victory for the president. This very much builds, Rita, by the way, on what he accomplished the first time around. So the first time around, Donald Trump also ruffled a lot of feathers when it comes to NATO. People tend to forget this, but he basically came in there and he said in a series of speeches and pronouncements, you guys are not pulling your weight there. The NATO treaty obligates you to spend at least 2%, ideally 5% of your gross domestic product on defense spending, on military spending there. And if you look back over his first term from 2017 to 2021, the total number of European countries that actually met that bare minimum 2% threshold roughly doubled. It was an astronomical increase there. So he's done this before, and he's doing it yet again there. But look, Donald Trump is a nationalist, okay? He believes in strong, sovereign, independent nation states there. What that means is that the United States is going to best partner with Europe when Europe can actually take care of itself, when Europe can actually take care of its own backyard. This notion that the U.S.-European alliance thrives when Europe is basically a glorified satrapy, when they're basically a province of the global American empire there. That's not a recipe for long-term United States European stability. Frankly, it's not a recipe for long-term stability when it comes to the United States and any other country around the world that we've been allied with in the past there. So this is the Donald Trump foreign policy doctrine. It worked like a charm, frankly, the first time around, and it's off to a heck of a start this time around as well. I frankly think, Rita, it's only going to get better from here, if I had to guess.
Yes, I mean, we've seen NATO be strengthened. We've seen the European nations that have basically have done very little finally start contributing to their own defence. And yet we've got the hysterics acting like this is the end of the world and democracy itself is under threat. Now, before you go, Josh, this is one of the most disturbing developments, but sadly entirely predictable. We are seeing some horrific footage out of Syria, religious minorities, including Christians, being tortured, being slaughtered, men, women, children. And this horror was, as I said, sadly predictable. Tulsi Gabbard was amongst those who warned us about what would occur, but there were people celebrating what happened in Syria, thinking this was going to be the dawn of some new age of democracy and human rights, when we've got Islamists in charge there. And when Islamists are in charge, minorities are slaughtered.
So this goes back at least as far as the Arab Spring, which started back in 2010, 2011, around there in Tunisia and really all throughout the Arab world there. You had this massive conflation with many people on the neoliberal left and the neoconservative faux right. You had this massive conflation between democracy and Islamism, where you saw kind of this democratic uprising or this populist uprising, but this populist uprising was being done in the name of what? In the name of Sharia supremacy, of Islamism, of radical fundamentalist Islam there. And, that's basically what happened here in Syria. I mean, Bashar al-Assad, let's not mince words. I mean, an absolute monster. I mean, a death toll of hundreds and hundred thousands, arguably over 1 million, an absolutely horrific person there, a total pawn of the evil Iranian regime there. And the world is better off that he's not in power. But we should not be pretending like the current guy in charge, al-Jilani, who was a peripatetic jihadist over his entire career there, former al-Qaeda there. These are bad, bad, bad people there. And frankly, at this point, they're basically just an extension of Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the increasingly radical regime in Ankara, Turkey there. So the Middle East is totally in flux, but this is obviously on a pure humanitarian level, an absolutely horrific situation there. Rita, one thing I will add briefly is that Israel right now is extending its reach into southwestern Syria, is trying to protect the Druze minority that is there in that particular part of the country there. Maybe there'll be some sort of momentum for kind of an autonomous Druze mini nation state or something. That would be a fantastic development. Frankly, it's something that the United States, I think, actually would do very well to get behind. But at a bare minimum, let's not treat these absolute jihadist thugs in Damascus like they're anything other than the thugs that they are.
And I think you're 100% right there, that there would be support in America for some sort of intervention to try to protect those religious minorities. I think that is the sort of military action that Americans, maybe not an enormous majority, but I think many Americans would be comfortable with. Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Rita.